A moving story of redemption, love, passions, and new beginnings. She lived on the streets. He was a millionaire on the brink of the abyss. When she saved him, she didn't know she was igniting a dangerous passion. What started as a rescue turned into a romance that could destroy them both. Watch this story until the end. You will be surprised by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this continuing. His hand found hers just as Clara tried to run away. Their fingers intertwined for a second that lasted an eternity, and the heat that rushed up her arm was so intense that it almost made her trip over her own feet. Arthur didn't let go of her right away. He stayed there, holding that hand that had taken care of him when he needed it most, feeling the rough skin from hard work against the soft palm of his fingers. Clara's heart raced as she looked up and met his dark gaze, filled with a dangerous mix of gratitude and desire that made her forget where she was. The Benar in Portasoins warehouse smelled of diesel oil and end-of-day sweat. It was almost 10 o'clock at night on a sweltering Thursday in March, and São Paulo was breathing that heavy air that precedes summer rains. Clara had deliberately chosen the times when she knew the building would be empty to clean. Working. In hiding was an art she had mastered for months. False documents, made-up names, always on night shifts when the executives in suits had already returned to their penthouses in MoMA and Jardins. But that night, something had gone wrong. She was on her back, scrubbing too hard at a stubborn stain on the concrete floor, when she heard the footsteps. They weren't the hurried footsteps of security guards on patrol, nor the tired shuffling of other cleaners. They were steady, measured steps in Italian shoes on the industrial floor. Clara felt her stomach turn. She knew that sound. When he turned around, he was just a few meters away. Arthur Benar looked even more imposing than she remembered. His dark suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there was a hint of a beard that hadn't been there. That morning when she'd last seen him, bloodied and unconscious in the wreckage of his car, his eyes were the same, dark as burnt coffee, intelligent and dangerously intense, but there was something new in them now. Recognition and a hunger she couldn't name. "So it was you," he said, and his voice was hoarse as if he had been shouting for hours. "I knew I would find you." Clara dropped the bucket. Dirty water spilled across the floor, staining the rubber boots she had bought at a thrift store in Liberdade. Her hands shook as she looked for a way out, but Arthur was blocking the only way to the door. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, and she hated how weak her voice sounded. "You must be mistaking me for someone else." Arthur took a step forward, then another. His eyes never left hers. "Marina Lopes," he said, reading the name tag hanging from her uniform. "Interesting. The last time we saw each other, you didn't have a name." Clara felt her blood run cold. She had been an idiot to think she could hide forever in a city like São Paulo, especially working for his company. But she needed the money. She needed the routine. She needed to feel like she still existed, even if it was just as a shadow wiping away the traces of other people's lives. "I don't know where you know me from," she insisted, taking a step back. Her back touched the cold wall of the warehouse. "I've only been working here a few weeks. You saved me." The words cut through the air like a blade. Clara closed her eyes for a second, reliving that night. The torrential rain, the deafening sound of metal shattering, the smell of gasoline and blood. She had spent months trying to forget. Months pretending none of it had ever happened. That she hadn't dragged an unconscious man through 100 yards of dense forest. That she hadn't spent 5 days caring for him in an abandoned house. In the mountains, afraid he would die in her arms. "You were bleeding so much," she whispered, almost without meaning to. "I thought you were going to die." Arthur stopped approaching. A strange expression crossed his face, something between relief and a pain so deep that Clara felt like touching his face, as she had done in those days when the fever had left him. Delirious. "I should have died," he said, and there was something haunted in his voice. "I wanted to die that night." Clara felt her chest tighten. She remembered the disjointed words he had muttered in his delirium, the nightmares that had him shouting names she didn't recognize. There was something broken about that man, something that all the money in the world couldn't fix. "Why did you disappear?" he asked, taking another step. He was so close now that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something purely masculine that made her stomach churn in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I've been looking for you. For months. I've used every resource I had. Because it was better this way." "For who?" Clara didn't know how to respond. It hadn't really been better for anyone. For the past 6 months she had woken up every night thinking about him, about the way he had murmured "thank you" when she had first given him water, about the way his hand had closed around hers when his fever was at its highest, about the look he had given her when he had finally opened his eyes fully and she had known he would live. "I offered money," Arthur continued, and now there was genuine frustration in his voice. "You didn't even wait to hear it." "I didn't want your money. So what did you want?" Clara lifted her chin, trying to find some courage. "Nothing. I didn't want anything from you." It was a lie, and from his eyes, Arthur knew it. "Bullshit," he said, confirming it. "You wanted the same thing I did. Only you ran away before we could find out what it was." Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. The closeness was becoming unbearable. Arthur was tall, much taller than she remembered, and the way he filled the space around her made her feel small and protected and terrified all at once. "I have to go," she said, trying to push herself away from the wall. "My shift is over and—" His hand came up, but not to touch her, only to block her path, his palm pressed against the wall beside her head. Clara felt the heat radiating from his body, the closeness making every nerve ending in her body awaken. "Please," she whispered, not knowing exactly what she was begging for. Arthur tilted his head, studying her face with an intensity that made her blush. "You're scared." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "From me?" Clara hesitated. "From me." Something changed in his eyes. Frustration gave way to an understanding that was even more dangerous. Arthur removed his hand from the wall and stepped back, creating space for her to breathe. "Okay," he said, and his voice was softer now. "You can go." Clara blinked, confused. "May I?" "You can, but I won't stop looking for you, and the next time you run away I'll find you again, and again, and again." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because I owe you my life, and I don't usually leave debts unpaid." Clara ran past him, her entire body trembling. She had reached the door when she heard his voice again. "Clara!" She stopped. She didn't turn around, but she stopped. "That's your real name, isn't it?" She closed her eyes. "How do you know?" "You were mumbling in your sleep. Those days. You were begging someone named Clara not to leave. It took me a while to realize you were talking to yourself." Clara felt tears burn her eyes. She hated that he knew. She hated that he paid attention. She hated that he cared. "Clara," he repeated, and this time the name sounded like a prayer. "Don't disappear again." She didn't promise anything. She just left. Arthur stood in the warehouse for a long time after she was gone, breathing in the air that still carried the faint scent of cheap soap and something indefinable that was purely hers. 6 months. 6 months of searching for the woman who had saved his life, and here she was just a few feet from his office, cleaning the floors of the company he had inherited from his father. The irony was not lost on him. He, who controlled empires, who moved millions with a single phone call, who had the power to create or destroy careers with a single word, had been saved by a woman who did not even officially exist. A woman who cleaned floors to survive, and who even so had more dignity in her eyes than most of the people who frequented her social circles. Arthur left the warehouse and went up to his office on the 40th floor. São Paulo stretched out, below like a sea of flickering lights, and he wondered how many people like Clara existed in the city. How many lived in the shadows, invisible to people like him? How many had stories that would never be told? He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Raul, it's me. I need you to cancel everything I have scheduled for tomorrow." He paused, looking at the spot where Clara had been just minutes before. "Actually, cancel the whole week." "Is there a problem, boss?" Arthur smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd given in months. On the contrary, I think I've finally found something worthwhile. The next day, Clara didn't show up for work. Arthur wasn't surprised. In fact, he had expected this, but he was prepared this time. He had resources, contacts, and something he hadn't had 6 months ago. He knew the name she was using and the company she worked for. Tracking her down would only be a matter of time. What he didn't expect was to find her in the last place he would have thought to look. Over the weekend, Arthur tried to follow his routine, but he couldn't get Clara out of his head. Meanwhile, she also struggled with her own ghosts, aware that their reunion was just the beginning of something much bigger and more dangerous than they could have imagined. Arthur felt something warm in his chest. It was strange, after years of controlling empires and people, to be putting his life in someone else's hands. But with Clara, it felt natural. Right. Days later, their paths would cross again, in an unexpected way. My apartment is in MoMA, top floor of the Santorini building. I know where it is. Arthur arched an eyebrow. You know? Clara blushed slightly. I might have been researching you. After that night, just out of curiosity. And what did you discover? That you are more complicated than you appear to be. Arthur laughed, and it was a genuine sound. Is that good or bad? I'm still deciding. They parted ways right there in the park, Clara leaving first and Arthur waiting 15 minutes before heading home. It was a beautiful Saturday day, the sun shining brightly over São Paulo, and he should have been feeling apprehensive about what he was about to hear. He should have been questioning the sanity of getting involved in such a dangerous situation. Instead, he felt more alive than he had ever felt before. Arthur arrived at the apartment and waited. He didn't know how Clara had planned to get there without being seen, but he trusted her. He had to trust her. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Arthur opened the door expecting to find Clara, but was greeted by a pizza delivery man. I didn't. Order pizza, he said. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 18, shrugged. It's here on paper. Apartment 4502, Arthur Benar. Arthur took the pizza and paid the boy, confused. He went to the kitchen and opened the box. Instead of pizza, there was a note. Go up to the terrace alone. Arthur smiled. Clara was being cautious until the end. He went up to the building's terrace, which offered a panoramic view of São Paulo. Clara was there, leaning on the wall, looking at the horizon. She had changed from her blue dress to dark clothes, jeans, a black blouse, sneakers. Her hair was loose now, moving in the breeze. How did you get up here? Clara turned around, an amused smile on her lips. Fire escape. Your building has terrible security, you know that? I'm going to have to change that. Yes, it will. The smile disappeared, replaced by a serious expression. Arthur, before we begin, I want you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you will change the way you see the world. You won't be able to pretend certain things don't exist anymore. Are you sure you want that? Arthur approached her, stopping a few feet away. Clara, I've spent the last 6 months trying to pretend you didn't exist. It didn't work. If you're in my life now, I want to know every part of it, including the dark parts. Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded. Fine. But first, I need to know if I can trust you completely. He can. I'll test that. Clara pushed away from the wall and approached him. Kiss me. Arthur blinked, confused. What? Kiss me. Now. Clara, you said no personal contact until... It's not about personal closeness, it's about trust. Her eyes were fixed on his, intense and determined. If we're going to do this together, if we're going to risk our lives for each other, I need to know if you can touch me without trying to control me. I need to know if you see me as an equal or as something to be protected. Arthur understood. It was a test. A way for Clara to gauge not just his attraction to her, but his respect, his ability to connect with her without trying to dominate her. He approached slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When she didn't pull away, he brought his hands to her face, feeling the soft skin beneath his fingers. Clara closed her eyes, and Arthur saw that she was trembling, not with fear but with anticipation. When their lips met, it was as if the world exploded into color. The kiss started soft, tentative, but quickly deepened. Clara pressed herself against him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and Arthur felt himself losing control. There was hunger in her kiss, a need that mirrored his own. But it was Clara who pulled away first, breathing heavily. "You passed the test," she said, and there was something new in her voice. "Now, sit down and prepare to hear things that will make you want to kill someone." Clara sat on the terrace wall, her legs dangling in the air, and Arthur felt his stomach turn at the sight. 45 stories up, and she seemed completely at ease with the abyss below. It was as if she had lost her fear of falling a long time ago. "The house was in Alphaville," she began, her voice cutting through the distant noise of São Paulo's traffic. "A huge mansion, high fences, armed security guards. From the outside, it looked like the home of any successful businessman. Inside," she paused, her eyes lost on the horizon. "Inside, it was hell disguised as paradise." Arthur sat in a nearby chair, keeping enough distance for her to feel safe, but close enough to hear every word. The sun was beginning to set, dyeing the São Paulo sky with shades of orange and pink that contrasted cruelly with the darkness of what Clara was about to reveal. "I was 19 when I got there. I was coming from Maceió, running away from a stepfather who, well, that doesn't matter now. What matters is that I was desperate, with no money, no place to stay. A woman approached me at the Tietê bus station. She said she knew a place where I could work, earn money, have a roof over my head. She seemed like an angel." Clara laughed, but the sound was devoid of any humor. Funny how demons always come disguised as salvation. Arthur felt his hands curl into fists. He already knew where this story was going, and every fiber of his being wanted to stop Clara, to spare her from reliving those memories. But she needed to talk, and he needed to listen. The woman's name was Solange, peroxide blonde, lots of plastic surgery, always smelling of expensive perfume. She took me to the mansion, gave me new clothes, a nice room, food. For the first few weeks I thought I had found luck in life. Clara paused, closing her eyes as if trying to block out the images that were flashing through her mind. Then the parties began. Solange said I would be a hostess, that my job would be to talk to the guests, serve drinks, make them feel welcome. She said they were important, powerful men, and that I should treat them with respect. The wind changed direction, bringing the smell of approaching rain. Clara pulled her blouse closer to her body, but Arthur doubted it was because of the cold. The first party I worked, I recognized some faces. Politicians I saw on television, businessmen who appeared on magazine covers, judges whose names appeared in the newspapers. Senator Carvalho was there, talking animatedly with a man who I later discovered was the head of the civil police. Clara opened her eyes and looked directly at Arthur. "Do you understand what this means? The men who were supposed to protect girls like me were financing our slavery." Arthur nodded, anger rising in his chest like a beast waking up. "How many girls were there in the house?" "It varied. Some stayed a few months before leaving. Others, like me, stayed longer. There were about 15 of us when I was there." Clara paused. "I stayed for 2 years." 2 years. Arthur repeated the words, trying to process the magnitude of suffering they represented. "Yes, and during those 2 years I saw things, heard conversations, witnessed negotiations that could bring down half of the Brazilian government." Clara got up from the wall and began to pace back and forth across the terrace. It was as if she couldn't sit still while she told the story. The parties were just one part of the business. The house served as a hub for a much larger network. They trafficked girls to other countries, mainly Europe and Asia. Some were sold to houses like this one in other cities. Others simply disappeared. How did they disappear? Clara stopped walking and stared at him. "Arthur, do you really want to know?" He hesitated. Part of him wanted to say no, wanted to spare her and himself the sordid details, but that would be cowardly. If Clara had the courage to tell him, he had an obligation to listen. "Yes, tell me everything." Some were killed when they tried to escape, others when they refused to cooperate with important clients, still others when they got sick or too old. Clara sat down on the wall again, this time with her back to the space, looking directly at him. There was a basement in the house, not an ordinary basement, a place where they disposed of the bodies. Arthur's stomach turned. Jesus Christ. I found out by accident. One night I couldn't sleep and decided to take a walk around the house. I ended up going down a staircase that I thought led to the cellar. Instead, I found Solange and two men talking about disposing of the damaged material. It took me a few seconds to realize that they were talking about a girl called Camilla, who had tried to run away the week before. Clara closed her eyes again, and Arthur saw tears beginning to form in the corners. I hid and listened to the whole conversation. They talked about other bodies, about how to get rid of evidence, about bribing police officers to avoid investigations. I heard names, amounts, locations. I heard enough to understand that operation moved millions of reais per month. And Senator Carvalho, he was one of the main financiers. He didn't just finance it, he provided political protection. Whenever there was an investigation that got too close, it was mysteriously shelved. Whenever an honest cop tried to apply pressure, he was transferred or silenced. Clara opened her eyes and looked at her hands. That night in the basement, I saw documents, contracts, bank transfers, lists of names. I photographed them all with a cell phone I had stolen from a client weeks before. Arthur leaned forward. Do you still have those pictures? Yes, hidden where no one can find them. Where? Clara smiled, and there was something fierce in her expression. If I tell you, you'll become an even bigger target. For now, it's better if you don't know. Arthur wanted to protest, but he understood her logic. If he was captured and tortured, he could not reveal what he did not know. How did you manage to escape? Lucky. Pure luck. Clara stood again, walking to the edge of the terrace and looking out over the city below. There was a raid by the federal police, not on the house, they would never come there without warning, but on one of the satellite properties, a hotel downtown that served as a meeting place for more discreet clients. The wind was getting stronger, bringing the first drops of rain. Clara didn't seem to notice. The operation caused panic. Solange and the others were desperate, trying to destroy evidence, transfer the girls to safe places. In the confusion, I managed to get out. I simply walked away. No one noticed in the middle of the chaos. And then I started running, and I never stopped. Clara turned to him, and now there was steely determination in her gaze. Arthur, do you understand what I'm offering you? It's not just justice for the girls who died. It's the chance to expose a network that corrupts the entire country. Politicians, judges, police, businessmen, all connected by dirty money and innocent blood. Arthur stood up, approaching her. The rain was starting to fall harder, but neither of them moved to take shelter. You said you photographed documents. What kind of documents? Contracts of sale and purchase, treating human beings as commodities. Bank transfers showing payments. To corrupt officials. Client lists with names you'd recognize from the newspapers and... Clara hesitated. Death records. A book where they wrote down when and how each girl died. The rain was drenching them both now, but Arthur barely noticed. His mind was working quickly, processing information, considering strategies. How many people know you have this evidence? Nobody. At least, nobody alive. Like this? Clara ran a hand through her wet hair. I tried to go to the police once. Right after I escaped, I went to a police officer who seemed honest, told him my story. He said he'd help me, that he'd investigate. And 2 weeks later, he turned up dead in his apartment. Suicide, according to the official version. Shot in the head. Clara laughed bitterly. After that, I understood that I could not trust anyone within the system. Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Clara, if they killed a deputy just because you talked to him, imagine what they'll do to us when they find out we're planning to expose everything. She turned fully to face him. Are you still sure you want to do this? Arthur looked at her, wet from the rain, shivering from the cold, but her eyes shining with a courage that went beyond any fear. In that moment, he knew he would do anything for her. Not just because he was in love, but because she represented something he had lost long ago, the belief that it was possible to fight for what was right. More certain than ever, he said. Clara studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Fine, but let's do this the smart way. No unnecessary heroics. I agree. What's the plan? First, we need allies. People outside the Brazilian system, who cannot be bought or intimidated. I have contacts in international human rights organizations and investigative journalists in other countries. Clara nodded. Good. Second, we need more evidence. What I have is enough to start an investigation, but not enough to support convictions. What kind of evidence? We need living witnesses, other girls who escaped, network employees who are willing to talk. Arthur considered this. It means exposing ourselves, coming out of the shadows. Yes, it's risky, but it's the only way. The rain was getting torrential now, and finally Arthur took the initiative. Let's go inside. You'll catch pneumonia out here. Clara hesitated. Your apartment, it has 3 bedrooms. You can choose where to sleep, and there are dry clothes and hot food. Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded. Fine, but only for tonight. They went downstairs to the apartment, and Arthur went to get towels and dry clothes while Clara stayed in the living room, dripping on the imported marble floor. When he returned, she was looking out the picture window, watching the city through the curtain of rain. Nice view, she said without turning around. Thank you. Arthur held out the towels and a shirt of his. The bathroom is over there. You can take a hot shower if you want. Clara picked up the things, but didn't move immediately. Arthur, can I ask something? Of course. Why were you trying? To kill yourself that night? What happened? Arthur hesitated. It was fair. She had shared her most painful memories with him. He owed her the same honesty. It was the anniversary of my father's death. 5 years. I had spent the whole day in the company offices, trying to distract myself with work, but it wasn't working. Clara turned to look at him, waiting for him to continue. My father built the Benar Empire from scratch. He was a brilliant, visionary man, but also obsessive. When I was a child, he was constantly traveling, always closing deals, always expanding. My mother was left alone with me, and it was too much for her. Arthur walked over to the window, standing next to Clara. She started drinking. Then she started using drugs. My father tried to put her in a hospital a few times, but she always came back worse. Then one night, when I was 12, she just disappeared. She left a note saying she couldn't live that life anymore. You never heard from her again? Never. My father hired detectives, offered rewards, ran public campaigns, nothing. It's like she evaporated. Clara lightly touched his arm. It was a brief touch, but Arthur felt the warmth spreading through his body. And your father? He never recovered. He buried himself even deeper in his work, as if he could build a wall of success and money against the pain. It worked for a while. But when I turned 25, Arthur paused. He started talking about legacy, about how I needed to take over the company, continue what he had started. And you didn't want to. I didn't know what I wanted. I had spent my whole life being groomed to take over the company, but no one had ever asked me if that was what I wanted. Arthur laughed bitterly. In fact, no one ever asked me what I wanted about anything. It was always assumed that I would. Follow the script my father wrote. Clara turned completely to him. What happened 5 years ago? My father found out he had cancer, pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. The doctors said he had 6 months at most. Arthur closed his eyes, reliving those last months. Instead of fighting it, he decided to speed up the transition. He passed all the responsibilities to me at once, as if to make sure I had no choice. And then? So he killed himself. 3 months after his diagnosis, he jumped from his office, on the 15th floor. Arthur opened his eyes, meeting Clara's understanding gaze. He left a note saying he preferred to leave on his own terms, and that I was now free to build my own legacy. Clara was silent for a moment, processing the story. Free, she said finally. Funny how sometimes people set us free in ways that imprison us even more. Exactly. I inherited everything, the company, the fortune, the responsibilities. But I also inherited the pain, the loneliness, the feeling that nothing I did really mattered. And that night, 5 years later, Arthur ran a hand through his damp hair. I had spent the day signing contracts that moved millions, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives, being treated like I was some kind of king. But when I got home, when the silence took over, I realized I had no one. No one to call. No one who cared if I was alive or dead, beyond what I represented to the business. So you decided to drive in the storm. It wasn't exactly a decision, it was more like an impulse, a need to feel something, anything, even if it was fear. Arthur looked at her. But then you showed up. Clara smiled sadly. Two castaways, saving each other, perhaps. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the rain wash over the city. There was something deeply intimate about the moment, not sexual, but emotional. Two people who had carried their traumas alone for so long, finally sharing the burden. Arthur, Clara said finally, once we start taking action against this network, they'll try to use our past against us. They'll try to discredit us, destroy us psychologically before they even get to physical violence. I know. Are you prepared to have your life dug up? To have your sanity, your ability, your motivation questioned? Arthur considered the question. I'm prepared for anything that will allow me to sleep in peace again. Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded. Fine, but there's something else you need to know before we fully commit to this. What? Clara took a deep breath as if preparing to jump off a cliff. The reason I was able to survive this long in the house, the reason I had access to such sensitive information. She paused, and Arthur saw that her hands were shaking. I became Senator Carvalho's favorite. The words fell into silence like stones in still water. Arthur felt something cold settle in his stomach. What does this mean? It means he chose me as his personal companion, that I spent 2 years pretending I had feelings for him, that I smiled as he touched me, that I feigned pleasure while I was dying inside. Clara stepped away from the window, walking to the center of the room. It means that I have done things that make me deeply ashamed, that I have said words that make me sick to remember, that I have prostituted myself, not only physically, but emotionally, to survive. Arthur felt murderous rage rise in his chest, but not for Clara, for having been forced to make impossible choices, for having been placed in a position where survival required betraying herself. Clara, no. She held up her hand, stopping him. Let me finish. Because you have to understand. When they try to discredit me, they'll say I was a willing prostitute, that I was in love with the senator, that I made all this up to get back at him. And do you care what they say? Clara laughed, but the sound was full of pain. I care what you'll think when you hear all the details, when you hear that I pretended to be in love with a man who killed innocent girls, when you hear that I shared a bed with a monster and smiled while I did it. Arthur crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped in front of her. Clara looked up to meet his eyes, and he saw years of shame and self-condemnation reflected there. Clara, look at me. She obeyed, albeit reluctantly. You did what you had to do to survive. In an impossible situation, you found a way to stay alive. Not just alive, you found a way to gather evidence that could save other girls. But you did nothing. You were a victim. Everything you did was a form of resistance. Clara shook her head. You don't understand. There were times when I almost believed my own lie. Times when I pretended so well that I forgot I was pretending. Arthur brought his hands to her face, forcing her to maintain eye contact. Clara, this is called survival. Your mind was protecting you the only way it knew how. How can you be sure? Because you escaped, because you gathered evidence, because you're here now willing to risk everything to get justice. Arthur paused. And because I see who you really are. And who am I? The bravest woman I've ever met. Clara closed her eyes, and tears began to stream down her face. Sometimes I dream about him, about the senator. I wake up thinking that I'm still there, that I never escaped. But you got away, and now we're going to make sure he pays for what he did. Clara opened her eyes, and there was a fierce determination there. Yes, let's go. They stood like that for a moment, staring into each other's eyes, and Arthur felt something shift between them. It wasn't just physical attraction or emotional gratitude. It was partnership, trust, the recognition of two wounded souls who had found in each other not just understanding, but purpose. "I'm going to take that bath now," Clara said finally. "Sure, I'll make us something to eat." Clara walked away toward the bathroom but stopped at the door. "Arthur?" "Yes?" "Thank you for listening to me, for not judging me. Thank you for trusting me." Clara disappeared into the bathroom, and Arthur was left alone in the living room, processing everything he had heard. The scale of the criminal network was staggering. It wasn't just human trafficking, it was a conspiracy involving some of the most powerful people in the country. And Clara had survived it. Not just survived, she had found a way to gather evidence that could destroy it all. He went into the kitchen and began preparing a simple dinner. As he cooked, his mind raced through the logistical details of what they would have to do. Contacting international journalists would be the first step. Then trying to find other victims willing to testify. And eventually, confronting the system from within. It would be dangerous, it would probably be fatal for one or both of them. But for the first time in years, Arthur felt that his life had a purpose beyond simply keeping an empire he had never wanted running. When Clara emerged from the bathroom wearing her shirt and with her wet hair streaming down her shoulders, Arthur felt his heart race. She looked younger, more vulnerable, but also stronger. As if telling her story had lifted a weight from her shoulders. "It smells good," she said, approaching the kitchen. "Shrimp risotto. I hope you like it. I haven't eaten like this in years." They ate dinner in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Arthur watched Clara eat, noticing how she savored each bite as if it were an unexpected luxury. Once again, he was reminded of how different their realities were. For him, a meal like this was routine. For her, it was a rare treat. "Arthur," Clara said when they had finished eating, "tomorrow I want you to take me somewhere." "Where?" "There is a woman who may have information about other victims of the network. She runs a shelter for vulnerable women in Bras. If anyone has contact with survivors, it would be her." "Is it safe?" Clara smiled, and there was something dangerous in her expression. "Nothing we do from now on is safe, but she is trustworthy, and if we're going to build a solid case, we need more witnesses." Arthur nodded. "Okay, we'll go tomorrow." They finished, cleaning the kitchen together, moving around each other with an ease that surprised them both. There was something domestic and intimate about the moment that contrasted with the somber nature of their conversations. "I'll sleep in the guest room," Clara said when they were finished. "Sure. There are clean clothes in the closet and anything you need." "I know, thank you." Clara headed for the room but stopped at the door. "Arthur, are you sure you want to do this? After everything I've told you, are you still sure?" Arthur looked at her, wearing his shirt, her hair messy, her eyes still, bearing the scars of what she had lived through, but shining with a courage that left him breathless. "More certain than I've ever been of anything in my life." Clara smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, full of warmth. "Good evening, Arthur." "Good evening, Clara." She closed the door, and Arthur was left alone in the room, looking out the window at the city. The rain had stopped, and sound. Paolo shone below like a field of fallen stars. Somewhere in that city, powerful men slept in expensive beds, believing their secrets were safe. In a few hours, he and Clara would begin to change that. Arthur went to his own room, but he couldn't sleep right away. He lay in the dark, thinking about Clara just a few feet away, thinking about what she had suffered, thinking about what they would have to face together. And for the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to the morning. Looking forward to the fight that could destroy them, but that could also save them. On the other side of the wall, Clara lay awake too, staring at the ceiling and thinking. There was something different about this night. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. And though she knew the next few days would bring dangers she could barely imagine, she felt stronger than she had in a long time. because now she had an ally. More than that, she had someone who saw her not as a victim but as a survivor. Someone who was willing to fight alongside her, not to protect her, but to bring justice. And if they died trying, at least they would die fighting. In the early hours of the morning, as São Paulo began to awaken below, neither of them knew that their lives were about to change in ways they could not imagine, that forces were already moving against them. That Senator Carvalho had woken that morning with a terrible premonition that his past was about to catch up with him. And in Brás, a woman named Madre Catarina looked out the window of her shelter, thinking about the call she had received and the young woman who would come to visit her in a few hours, a young woman she had helped hide once, and who was now returning to seek something much more dangerous than shelter. The storm had passed, but another was brewing, and this time it would be much more devastating than the first. Clara woke to the sound of voices coming from the living room. For a moment, panic gripped her. Years of living underground had conditioned her body to wake up ready to flee. But then, the memories of the night before came flooding back, and she remembered where she was, in Arthur's apartment. Safe, at least temporarily. She got up silently and approached the door, trying to identify the voices. Arthur was talking to someone, but his tone was tense, almost hostile. Clara recognized the second voice, male, older, with a disguised carioca accent. "Arthur, you need to be reasonable," the man said, canceling important meetings without explanation, disappearing for days. "Investors are getting nervous." "The investors can wait, Marcelo," Arthur replied, and Clara could hear the irritation in his voice. "I have other matters to attend to." "What matters? Since when do you have other matters that are more important than the company?" Clara quickly dressed in the clothes she had worn the night before and opened the door slightly enough to peer into the room. Arthur was standing near the window, wearing a dark suit that made him look even more imposing. Across the room, a shorter, plump man of about 50 was gesturing nervously. "Marcelo, I appreciate your concern, but I don't owe you explanations about my personal life." "Personal life?" The man, Marcelo, laughed, but the sound was devoid of humor. "Arthur, you haven't had a personal life in years. The company is your life, always has been." Clara saw Arthur turn to face the man, and there was something dangerous in his posture. "Maybe it's time to change that." Marcelo stopped gesturing and became very quiet. "What do you mean?" "I'm saying that my life can't be about financial reports and board meetings forever." "Arthur..." Marcelo stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Are you okay? Ever since that accident, you've been acting strange. Maybe you should seek professional help." Clara saw Arthur's jaw tighten. "I don't need professional help. I need space." "Space for what? To destroy yourself like your father did?" The Queen. Silence that followed was so heavy that Clara found it hard to breathe. Arthur stood completely still for a moment, then slowly turned to Marcelo. "Repeat that." "Arthur, I didn't mean to." "Repeat that." Marcelo swallowed. "I was just worried. You've been acting impulsively, like Rodolfo did in the last few months before you kill yourself." Arthur finished the sentence, his voice dangerously calm. "Is that what you're implying, that I'm following in my father's footsteps?" Clara decided she had heard enough. She opened the door fully and stepped into the room, causing both men to look in her direction. Marcelo looked her up and down with calculating eyes, and she saw the exact moment he came to conclusions about who she was and what she was doing there. "Good morning," she said simply, walking toward the kitchen as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Clara," Arthur said, and there was relief in his voice. "How did you sleep?" "Well, thank you." She grabbed a cup and began making coffee, aware that Marcelo was watching her every move. "Sorry to interrupt. You two can continue talking." Marcelo looked from Clara to Arthur, then back to Clara. "I didn't know you were with someone." "There are many things you don't know about my life, Marcelo," Arthur replied, approaching Clara. "Clara, This is Marcelo Santos, my vice president. Marcelo, this is Clara. Marcelo held out his hand, but Clara pretended not to see, concentrating on stirring her coffee. She had learned long ago to size people up quickly, and there was something about Marcelo that made her uncomfortable. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, as if he were trying to gauge her worth. Or maybe it was simply paranoia. Years of living underground had taught her to be wary of anyone new. "Well," Marcelo said after an awkward moment, "Arthur, I need you to reconsider your decision about tomorrow's meeting. Senator Carvalho will be present, and he specifically asked to speak with you." Clara almost dropped the cup. Slowly, she turned to look at Marcelo, trying to keep her expression neutral. "Senator Carvalho," Arthur repeated, and Clara could hear the tension in his voice. "Yes, he is interested in discussing some investments in the port sector. It could be very profitable for us." Clara exchanged a quick glance with Arthur. It was too soon. They weren't ready to expose themselves yet, much less confront Carvalho directly. "I'll think about it," Arthur said finally. "Arthur, you can't just think about an opportunity like this. The senator is one of the most influential figures in the country. If he's interested in doing business with us—" "I said I'll think about it," Arthur cut in, and there was a finality in his voice that made Marcelo flinch. "Okay, but I need an answer by the end of the day." Marcelo picked up his briefcase and headed for the door. "And Arthur, whatever's going on in your personal life, don't let it compromise the company. A lot of people depend on us." When the door closed behind Marcelo, Clara felt her shoulders relax. She hadn't realized how tense she had been. "Does he suspect anything?" she asked. "No, Marcelo is just protective of the company. He's been working with me for 10 years, Arthur approached her. But the mention of Senator Carvalho was no coincidence. Clara nodded. "They're on the move, trying to lure you into a meeting where they can assess you, see if you pose any threat." "How could they know you were with me?" "They don't know, not yet. But someone saw you looking for me or saw you in the park yesterday. In a network like this, information travels fast." Arthur ran a hand through his hair, clearly worried. "Does this change our plans?" Clara considered the question. "Actually, it might be an opportunity if we can turn the tables, use this meeting against them." "That's too dangerous." "Everything we're going to do is dangerous. The question is whether we want to be reactive or proactive." Arthur studied her for a moment. "What are you thinking?" "It's still too early to give details. But first, we need to go to Brass. Mother Caterina may have information that changes our strategy." An hour later, they were in Arthur's car, cruising through the busy streets of São Paulo toward Brass. Clara had insisted on wearing simpler clothes and a cap to disguise his face, and she instructed Arthur to do the same. It was strange to see him without his impeccable suit. In jeans and a t-shirt, he looked younger, more approachable. "Tell me about Mother Catherine," Arthur said as he drove. "She's been running a shelter for vulnerable women for over 20 years. Officially, it's just a place where women can sleep, eat, and get basic medical care. Unofficially," Clara paused, "it's an underground railway station that helps women escape from dangerous situations." "Did she help you hide?" "For a few months, right after I escaped. She was the one who taught me how to live invisibly, how to change my identity, how to stay safe." Clara stared out the window, watching the city pass by. "Without her, I would have died in the first few days." They arrived in Brass mid-morning. The neighborhood was abuzz with activity, street vendors shouting their wares, buses dropping off passengers at stops, the smell of street food mixing with the constant din of traffic. It was a completely different world from the upscale neighborhoods where Arthur lived. The shelter was on a side street, in an old building that had seen better days. The facade was faded, and a small, inconspicuous sign identified the place as House of Hope. Clara knocked on the door in a specific way. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. The door opened, revealing a black woman of about 60, short and stout, with graying hair tied back in a bun. Her eyes were intelligent and wary, examining first Clara, then Arthur. "Clara," she said, and there was warmth in her voice, "and I was wondering when you'd show up." "Hi, Mother, this is Arthur." Mother Catherine studied Arthur carefully, and Clara could see the older woman forming impressions quickly. "Come in, quickly." The interior of the shelter was simple but clean. There were bunk beds lined up in a large room, a small kitchen, and a few chairs scattered around where women of various ages chatted in low voices. Some glanced curiously at the visitors, but most remained focused on their own activities. Mother Catherine led them to a small office in the back of the building. The room was crammed with files, documents, and photographs of women who had passed through the shelter. Clara recognized a few faces, some who had managed to rebuild their lives, others who had not been so lucky. "Sit down," Mother Catherine said, closing the door behind them. "Clara, you look better, more hopeful." Clara smiled. "Things have changed. I imagine so if you're here with him." Mother Catherine turned to Arthur. "Do you know who she is, what she's been through?" "I know. And yet it's here. I'm here because of it, not in spite of it." Mother Caterina nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. "Well, Clara told me on the phone that you need information about the network, specifically about other survivors." "Yes," Clara replied. "We're building a case against them, but we need more witnesses." "It's dangerous, Clara, very dangerous. The last women who tried to speak, what happened to them?" "Mother," Catherine sighed deeply. 3 women have come here in the last 2 years, all survivors of the same network you escaped from. 2 of them tried to go to the police. The 3rd tried to speak to a journalist." Clara felt her stomach tighten. "And?" "The first was found dead in the Tietê River 3 days after giving her statement. Suicide, according to the police. The second simply disappeared. She left the shelter one morning and was never seen again. The 3rd—" Mother Caterina paused. "The 3rd is alive, but she is too terrified to speak." Arthur leaned forward. "Where is she?" "Here, at the shelter. She goes by the name Teresa, but that's not her real name." Clara and Arthur exchanged glances. "Can we talk to her?" "You can try, but she doesn't talk about the past with anyone. Not even me." Mother Catherine led them back into the main room. She approached a young woman, perhaps 25, who was sitting alone in a corner, knitting. The woman was beautiful, but there was something broken in her posture, a fragility that Clara recognized immediately. "Teresa," Mother Catherine said gently, "there are some people who would like to talk to you." Teresa looked up, and, when she saw Clara, her expression changed completely. Recognition, fear, and something that might have been hope. "You," she whispered. "I know you." Clara approached slowly. "Hi, Teresa, what's your real name?" "I can't—" Teresa looked around nervously. "I can't talk about this." "I understand," Clara said, sitting down next to her. "I ran away, too, from the house in Alphaville." Teresa's eyes widened. "Did you make it out?" "I did it, and now I'm trying to help other people get justice." Teresa shook her head vigorously. "No, it's impossible. They're too powerful. They have people everywhere." "I know, but it's not just us now." Clara gestured to Arthur. "We have resources, contacts, we can protect you." "No one can." "Protect me," Teresa said, and there was desperation in her voice. "You don't understand. They killed Camilla. They killed Sophia. They'll kill me too if they find out where I am." Clara felt her blood run cold. "Camilla? Camilla with the curly hair who always sang when she was nervous?" Teresa nodded, tears starting to stream down her face. She tried to tell a police officer everything. 3 days later, she was found dead in the river. And Sophia? Sophia spoke to a journalist. He published an article, but without mentioning specific names. Even so, she disappeared a week later. Arthur stepped closer, keeping his voice low and calm. "Teresa, I understand your fear, but if we do nothing, more women will die. You have information that can help stop that." Teresa looked at him like he was an alien. "You don't understand. They have money, power, connections. What do you have against that?" "The truth," Clara said simply. "The truth is not enough." "No, it's not enough, but it's a start." Teresa was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands. Finally she spoke. her voice so low that Clara had to lean in to hear. "I saw documents. In the house. Lists with names of clients, amounts, locations of other houses." Clara felt her heart race. What kind of documents? Contracts. Like we. Were merchandise being sold? There were different prices for different things. Teresa paused, wiping away tears, and there was a calendar with the names of important people who were coming to the parties. Politicians, judges, businessmen, police officers. I recognized some names from television. Arthur leaned forward. "Do you remember any specific names?" Teresa hesitated, then whispered. "Senator Carvalho came once a month. He always asked for the same thing, a new young girl who looked scared." Clara closed her eyes, reliving her own memories. "He liked fear. He said it made him more excited." "Have you met him?" Teresa asked. "Unfortunately, yes." Teresa studied Clara's face, and something changed in her expression. "If you manage to escape him, maybe there really is something we can do." "It's possible," Clara said firmly, "but we need your help." Teresa was silent for a long moment, clearly fighting an internal battle. Finally, she nodded. "What do you want to know?" The next 2 hours were spent in intense conversation. Teresa revealed details that perfectly complemented the information Clara already had. Names of other clients, descriptions of other properties used by the network, details about how the operations worked. More importantly, she revealed something Clara didn't know. The network wasn't limited to Brazil. There were international connections with similar houses in other Latin American countries, and the center of operations for the entire region wasn't in Alphaville. It was on a farm in the interior of São Paulo near Campinas. "That's where they take the girls when they come from other countries," Teresa explained. "It's like a distribution center. They decide who goes where, who has what role." Arthur took notes discreetly, and Clara could see the anger rising in his eyes with each revelation. But he remained calm, asking specific questions, gathering details. "Teresa," he said finally, "would you be willing to testify? On the record?" Teresa shook her head immediately. "I can't. If they find out I spoke." "What if we ensure your protection? What if we get you out of the country before anyone can hurt you?" As Arthur looked at Clara, who nodded, it was time to reveal at least some of his resources. "I have contacts in other countries. I can organize a new identity, a safe house, a job. You would never have to worry about them again." Teresa considered this for a long moment. "And in return?" "In return, you record a detailed statement before you travel, something we can use as evidence." "What if it doesn't work?" "What?" "If they find out anyway?" Clara gently touched Teresa's arm. "Then at least we'll have tried. And maybe our attempt will help save other girls who are going through what we went through." Teresa closed her eyes, and Clara saw tears beginning to form. "I think about them every night, about the girls who are still there, about the ones who will arrive tomorrow, next week, then help us save them." Teresa opened her eyes and looked directly at Clara. "Okay, I'll do it." By the time they left the shelter, it was mid-afternoon. The March sun was shining brightly, and the streets of Braz were still bustling with activity. Clara felt strangely optimistic. For the first time, she had the feeling that they might actually be able to build a solid case. "She was brave," Arthur said as they walked back to the car. "Yes, and now we have 2 witnesses, photographic documents, and information about the location of other operations." "That's enough to start with." Clara stopped walking. "Arthur, about the meeting." "With Senator Carvalho, let's not go, it's too dangerous. Actually, I'm thinking maybe we should go." Arthur turned to look at her, clearly surprised. "Clara, are you crazy? If he recognizes you—" "He won't recognize me. I've changed a lot since I left the house, and besides—" Clara smiled, and there was something dangerous in the expression. "Maybe it's time I confronted my demons. It's crazy. It's strategic. Think, if we can record him talking about the business, if we can get first-hand evidence. What if he finds out who you are? What if it's a trap? Clara considered the questions. Then we improvised. Arthur shook his head. I don't like that idea. You don't have to like me. You have to trust me. They reached the car, but before Arthur could open the door, Clara grabbed his arm. Arthur, I need to ask you something. What? Are you doing this for me? Because of how you feel about me? Arthur stared at her. Partly, yes. That's not a good enough answer. Why? Because if you're doing this just for me, you're going to make decisions based on emotion, not logic, and that could kill us both. Arthur was quiet for a moment, considering her words. You're right. When I started, it was about you. About gratitude, about some other things I feel for you. And now? It's about justice now, about stopping monsters who destroy innocent lives, about doing the right thing. Arthur paused. You changed that in me, Clara. You reminded me that some things are worth fighting for no matter the personal cost. Clara smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, full of warmth. All right, then let's go to this meeting. Clara. Arthur, I've spent 2 years learning to read that man. I know how he thinks, how he acts, what motivates him. If anyone can get information out of him without arousing suspicion, it's me. Arthur still looked worried, but he nodded. Okay, but we'll do it my way, with all the precautions possible. I agree. They got into the car and began the journey back to MoMA. Clara looked out the window, watching the city pass by, but her mind was focused on what she had to do the next day. It would be the first time she would see Senator Carvalho since she had escaped. The first time she would have to pretend not to recognize him, while every fiber of her being screamed in disgust and terror. But it would also be the first time she would face him as an equal, not as a victim. And that made all the difference, Clara, Arthur said suddenly. Yes? About the rules you set, about not getting close until this is over. Clara turned to look at him. What's wrong? It's getting harder to respect them. Clara felt her heart race, but she kept her voice calm. Why? Because every day I spend with you, the more I care. And tomorrow, when you're in the same room as that monster, I'm going to have to pretend we're just business partners. That's exactly what we are. Clara, we both know that's not true. Clara was silent for a moment. It was true. The rules she had set were becoming harder to maintain, the constant closeness, the growing trust, the way Arthur looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking. All of it was breaking down her carefully constructed defenses. The rules still apply, she said finally. Why? Because if we get emotionally involved now, we'll start making decisions with our hearts instead of our heads. And that could kill us. Arthur nodded, but Clara could see he wasn't satisfied with the answer. And honestly, neither was she. But they had to be practical. They had to be smart. They had to survive. They arrived at Arthur's apartment late, in the afternoon. While he checked his emails and made a few calls to organize the next day's meeting, Clara isolated herself in the guest room to mentally prepare herself for what was to come. She sat up in bed and closed her eyes, forcing herself to relive memories she had tried to forget. The smell of the senator's cologne, the sound of his voice, the way he smiled when he was pleased, the way his eyes changed when he was angry. She needed to remember all these details. She needed to be prepared to see him again without letting her emotions betray her. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. Clara, may I come in? Between. Arthur opened the door, carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. I thought you might be hungry. Thank you. Clara took the teacup, grateful for the warmth that spread through her hands. Arthur sat down in the armchair next to the bed. How are you feeling? Nervous, terrified, anxious. Clara smiled wryly. The usual multiple choice. We don't have to do this, you know. We can find another way. No, we can't. This is our best chance to get direct evidence. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Clara, can I ask you something personal? He can. What did you feel about him? About the senator? At the time, Clara considered the question carefully. It was something she herself had asked herself many times. Hate mostly, but also relief. Relief, because being his favorite meant I was relatively safe. Other girls had to deal with different customers. Every night, some violent, some sadistic, I had to deal only with him. Clara paused, stirring her tea absently. There were times, God forgive me, when I could almost pretend we were a normal couple. He could be charming when he wanted to, be intelligent, funny even. In those moments it was easier to bear. That doesn't make you a bad person, Clara. No? I smiled at the man who killed innocent girls. I feigned pleasure as he touched me. I told him I loved him when he needed to hear it. You did what? You had to do to survive. Sometimes I wonder if it really was just survival, if on some level I didn't. Clara trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. No what? If I haven't started developing real feelings for him. Stockholm Syndrome, maybe, or just loneliness. Arthur stood up and walked over to the bed, sitting on the edge. Clara, look at me. She complied, meeting his dark, gentle eyes. You were a victim, a survivor. Any feelings you had were a natural response to an impossible situation. That doesn't make you an accomplice. It doesn't make you any less of a victim. Clara felt tears starting to form. How can you be so sure? Because I see who you are now. I see the courage, the strength, the compassion. I see a woman who is willing to risk everything to save other people. That is who you really are. Clara leaned forward, resting her forehead on his shoulder. Arthur hesitated for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her, holding her gently. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. I'm afraid to see him again. I'm afraid that all the defenses I've built will crumble when I look into his eyes. That's not going to happen. How can you be sure? Arthur pulled back slightly to look at her. Because you're not the same person you were in that house anymore. You've found your strength, and because I'll be there for you. Clara studied him for a moment, seeing the sincere determination in his eyes. Arthur, if things go wrong tomorrow, they won't give it. But if they do, I want you to know that these past few days have been the first in years that I've felt truly alive. Arthur brought his hand to her face, wiping away a tear that had escaped. Clara. No, let me finish. Clara took a deep breath. When I saved you that night, I thought I was just doing what any decent person would do. But now I realize you saved me too. You gave me hope. You gave me purpose. You gave me so much more than that. What? A reason to live. They stood like that for a moment, staring into each other's eyes, and Clara felt the rules she had set begin to unravel. There was something magnetic between them, an attraction that went far beyond the physical. Slowly, Arthur leaned toward her. Clara knew she should pull away, maintain the distance she had insisted on preserving. But when his lips touched hers, all rational thought disappeared. The kiss started soft, hesitant, but quickly deepened. Clara pressed herself against him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for one glorious moment she was able to forget everything, the fear, the danger, the painful memories. There was only Arthur, the warmth of his body, the taste of his lips. It was Clara who pulled away first, breathing heavily. We can't, she whispered. I know. The rules. I know, Arthur repeated, but he didn't pull away completely. But, Clara, you need to know I don't care what happens tomorrow. I don't care about the risks. You're worth any danger. Clara felt her heart race. Arthur. I love you, he said simply. Maybe it's too soon to say it. Maybe it's too complicated under the circumstances. But it's true. And I wanted you to know it before tomorrow. Clara stared at him, seeing the absolute sincerity in his eyes. Part of her wanted to tell him that she loved him too, because if she was honest with herself, it was true. But another part of her knew that saying it would change everything, would make it impossible to stay focused on what they had to do. Arthur, she said finally, ask me again after this is over. He smiled, and there was sadness in his expression. Promise there will be an after. I promise I'll fight for one. Arthur nodded and stood up. Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He was almost to the door when Clara spoke again. Arthur? Yes? Thank you for giving me a reason to believe that fighting is worth it. After he left, Clara was left alone with her thoughts. The kiss still burned on her lips, and she knew she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The rules she had set were broken, and it terrified her as much as it excited her. But maybe that was what she needed. Maybe she needed something to fight for that was bigger than her own survival. Maybe she needed love, even if she couldn't say the word out loud yet. Outside, the sun was setting over São Paulo, dyeing the sky with colors that promised a new day. And with this new day would come the moment of truth, the moment when she would have to face the man who had haunted her nightmares for years. But this time she wouldn't be alone, and this time she wouldn't be a victim. This time she would be a hunter. Next morning, Clara woke before her alarm. She had slept little, but she felt strangely calm. It was as if all the conflicting emotions of the previous night had settled into a cool, focused determination. She took a long shower, mentally preparing herself for the role she would have to play. She would not be Clara, the survivor who had escaped the trafficking ring. She would be Marina, Arthur Bernard's personal assistant, a professional and confident woman who had nothing to hide. When she left the room, Arthur was already in the kitchen, making coffee. He was wearing a dark suit that made him look even more imposing, and Clara felt a twinge of pride. He would be perfect for the role of the successful businessman interested in new investments. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Ready." Arthur studied her carefully. Clara had chosen conservative clothes, a dark skirt, white blouse, hair pulled back in a severe bun. There was something different about her, a professional coolness he hadn't seen before. "Clara?" "Yes?" "You look different." Clara smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm in character. Marina is different from Clara." Arthur nodded, understanding, but there was something in her gaze that worried him, a distance that hadn't been there the night before. "Remember the rules for today?" Clara asked. "I remember. You're my personal assistant. We've been working together for 6 months. You have access to confidential information, but you don't make important decisions. And if something goes wrong, we follow the emergency plan." Clara nodded. "Great, then let's go." As they drove to the meeting place, a luxury hotel in Jardins, Clara mentally reviewed every detail she needed to remember about Senator Carvalho, his mannerisms, his preferences, the way he treated subordinates versus equals. But most of all, she prepared herself to see him again without letting the past dominate her. Because today she was not his victim. Today she was his hunter, and Senator Carvalho had no idea that his nemesis had returned to destroy him. The Copacabana Palace Hotel in São Paulo was the kind of place where powerful people did business, away from prying eyes. Located on a discreet street in Jardins, the hotel offered absolute privacy and guaranteed discretion. Clara knew that the choice of location had not been a coincidence. Senator Carvalho had always preferred environments where he could control all the variables. Arthur parked the car and turned to Clara. "Last chance to change your mind." Clara adjusted the fake pearl necklace she had chosen to complete her disguise. "I'm not changing my mind." "Is the recorder working?" Clara discreetly touched the small pen that was clipped to the lapel of her blazer. The device was so small that it looked like nothing more than an ornament, but it was able to pick up conversations with crystal clarity. "It's working." "What if he recognizes you?" "He won't recognize me. I've changed a lot, and he never really paid attention to my face anyway. To him, I was just a function." Arthur clenched his fists. "Clara, if at any time you feel uncomfortable—" "I know. Code yellow to leave immediately. Code red if you need urgent help." They walked into the hotel together, and Clara forced herself to maintain the straight, confident posture she had practiced. The lobby was elegant without being ostentatious, decorated with leather furniture and contemporary art. A few people milled about the couches, talking in low voices about business and politics. Marcello greeted them near the elevators. "Arthur, I'm glad you decided to come. Marcello, this is Marina, my personal assistant." Clara extended her hand with a professional smile. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Santos." Marcello shook his hand, examining it quickly. "The pleasure is mine. Arthur spoke highly of your work. He is a demanding but fair boss." They went up to the 10th floor, where a suite had been reserved for the meeting. Clara felt her heart beating faster with each floor they passed, but she kept her expression serene. She had practiced this moment hundreds of times in her mind. "Has the senator arrived yet?" Arthur asked. "He arrived a few minutes ago. He's looking forward to meeting you." The door to the suite opened, revealing an elegant space overlooking the city. There was a conference table in the center, a few armchairs scattered around, and a balcony with a panoramic view. And near the window, with his back to the door, was a figure that Clara recognized immediately. Senator Eduardo Carvalho turned as they entered, and the political smile spread across his face. He was older than Clara remembered, more grey hair, more wrinkles around his eyes, but he maintained the same imposing presence he had always exerted. "Arthur Bernard," he said, approaching with open arms, "what a pleasure to finally meet you. I hear great things about your company." Clara stood a step behind Arthur, as was appropriate for an assistant, as the two men greeted each other. When the senator's gaze passed over her, there was only vague recognition, a professional woman irrelevant to the men's business. "Senator, the pleasure is mine," Arthur replied. "This is Marina, my assistant. She will be taking notes for the meeting." The senator gave a distracted nod in Clara's direction. Of course, please, have a seat." Clara sat in a side chair, opening a laptop and pretending to prepare to take notes. Her position gave her a clear view of both men and allowed the recorder to pick up their conversations easily. "Well," the senator said, pouring himself an expensive whiskey, "I imagine you're curious about the proposition I have for you." "Quite curious," Arthur confirmed. "This is an opportunity in the port sector, specifically in the expansion of cargo operations at the port of Santos." Clara glanced up discreetly. The port of Santos was mentioned frequently in the documents she had photographed. It was one of the main entry routes for international trafficking. "What kind of expansion?" Arthur asked. "New storage facilities, more modern equipment, and most importantly..." The senator leaned forward. "New import channels for specialty goods." "Special goods?" The senator smiled, and there was something predatory in his expression. "Let's just say that not all cargo that arrives in Brazil goes through official channels. There is always a demand for flexibility in the inspection processes." Clara felt her stomach turn. He was offering Arthur direct participation in the smuggling operations. "I see," Arthur said carefully. "And what kind of return can I expect from this investment?" "Substantial. We're talking profit margins of 300 to 500%. Of course, there are risks involved, but with the right protections in place." "What protections?" The senator gestured vaguely. "I have good relationships with the IRS, the federal police, and the public prosecutor's office. When you have the right contacts, many problems simply disappear." Clara was transcribing every word, but part of her mind was focused on something more specific. There was something familiar about the way the senator was carrying himself, an overconfidence, an air of complete security. It was how she remembered him at the parties at the mansion. "Senator," Arthur said, "may I be direct? What assurances do I have that this operation is legitimate?" The senator laughed, and the sound made Clara's skin crawl. "My dear Arthur, legitimacy is a relative concept. What matters is profitability and discretion. What if there are investigations? There won't be. I personally guarantee it." "How can you be so sure?" The senator leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with himself. "Because I control the people who would do these investigations. Sheriffs, prosecutors, judges. They all have their prices or their weaknesses." Clara saw Arthur lean forward slightly. "Weaknesses? All powerful men have vices, Arthur. Some are fond of gambling, some are fond of drugs, still others. The senator paused meaningfully. They have more specific tastes in entertainment. Clara's heart stopped for a moment. He was referring to the parties, to the girls at the mansion. Entertainment? Arthur repeated. You are a single man, Arthur. Surely you understand that sometimes we need special company. Company that doesn't ask questions, that doesn't tell stories. Clara felt nausea rising in her throat. He was offering Arthur access to the girls. What kind of company? Arthur asked, and Clara could hear the tension in his voice. The senator looked around conspiratorially, as if he were about to impart a valuable secret. I have access to some very special young women, discreet, well-trained, completely trustworthy. Some are specially imported for discerning clients. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, forcing herself to maintain her composure. It was exactly as she remembered. He talked about human beings as if they were products. Imported? Arthur asked. Latin American mostly. Young, pretty, desperate girls. Much more cooperative than the Brazilians. The senator laughed again. In fact, I have a house where I keep some of my favorites. You should come over sometime. I'm sure we'd find something to your liking. Clara opened her eyes and met Arthur's gaze for a moment. There was murderous fury in his eyes, but he kept his expression neutral. Interesting, Arthur said. And these girls, are they trustworthy? Absolutely. You know that if you talk about anything you've seen or heard, the senator made a slit-throat gesture. Problems go away. Permanently. It was at that moment that Clara knew she had enough evidence. The senator had confessed not only to his involvement in human trafficking, but also to murder. It was all being recorded. But then, something unexpected happened. The senator stood to get more ice, and his gaze fell on Clara. This time, instead of walking past her absently, he stopped. He studied her face more closely. Clara kept her expression professionally neutral, but her blood ran cold when she saw recognition beginning to form in his eyes. "Marina, isn't it?" he said slowly. "Yes, sir." The senator continued to stare at her, and Clara saw the exact moment the memory clicked in his mind. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "How interesting," he murmured. "You remind me of someone I met a few years ago." Clara forced a polite smile. "It must be a coincidence. I have one of those ordinary faces." "No, it's not common. In fact, it's quite specific." The senator approached her, and Clara felt every instinct screaming to run. "What's your last name again?" "Lopez," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady. "Marina Lopez." The senator repeated the name, savoring every syllable. "And how long have you worked for Mr. Bernard?" 6 months. 6 months. The senator nodded slowly. "And before that?" Clara felt Arthur shift slightly in his chair, preparing to act. "I worked for a consulting firm." "What company?" The question was loaded with suspicion. Clara realized she was losing control of the situation. "Santos and Associates," she lied. "Interesting. I know the consulting market in São Paulo well. I've never heard of this company." The silence that followed was tense. Clara could feel the senator studying every detail of her face, seeking confirmation for the suspicion that was growing in his mind. "Senator," Arthur interjected, "can we get back to the investment discussion? Marina needs to get back to the office soon." But the senator never took his eyes off Clara. "You know, a few years ago I met a young woman who looked a lot like you. Same eyes, same facial structure. She worked for me in a special capacity." Clara felt cold sweat running down her back. It must have been a coincidence? Maybe, but that young woman disappeared one night. She just vanished. I've always wondered what happened to her. "Senator," Arthur said, his voice a little louder, "we really need to get down to business." The senator finally looked away from Clara, but the smile he gave Arthur was full of mischief. Of course, but Arthur, you should be more careful about who you employ. Sometimes people aren't who they seem to be." Clara knew they had to leave. Now. "Actually," she said, standing up, "I need to make some urgent calls. Can I use another room?" "Certainly," the senator said, but there was something dangerous in his eyes. "Marcelo can show the way." Clara left the room with Marcelo, but she knew the senator was suspicious. She had a few minutes at most before he decided to act on his suspicions. In the hallway, she pretended to make a phone call while she thought quickly. They had what they needed, taped confessions that could destroy the senator. But now, they were in immediate danger. She returned to the room where she found Arthur and the senator engaged in a tense conversation. "Arthur," she said, "the call you've been waiting for has come in. We need to get back to the office right away." Arthur stood up. "Senator, it was a pleasure. I will consider your proposal and be in touch." Of course, the senator also stood but did not come over to say goodbye. "But Arthur, one last thing." "Yes?" "Be careful who you trust. Sometimes our greatest enemies are closer than we think." They left the suite in silence, but Clara could feel the senator's eyes burning into her back. In the elevator, she whispered to Arthur, "He knows." "I perceived. We have to get out of town. Now." They reached the ground floor and headed for the parking lot. But Clara noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were two men standing next to Arthur's car, pretending to chat casually but clearly watching. "Don't go to the car," she whispered. "Why?" "They've already sent people. Let's go out through the service entrance." Clara led Arthur through the hotel's service corridors, a skill she had learned during her years of underground living. They exited through a back door and merged with the crowd on the street. "Where to now?" Arthur asked. "We have to get to the evidence I'm hiding. If they recognize me, they'll try to destroy anything that could incriminate us." They took a taxi and headed to Braz. During the trip, Clara checked to see if the recorder had captured everything. The quality was perfect. Every word, every confession, every threat. "We have him," she told Arthur. "We have enough evidence to destroy not just the senator, but the entire network." "And now?" "Now we are executing the plan we discussed. We are contacting international journalists, sending copies to multiple investigative agencies simultaneously." They arrived at Mother Catherine's shelter, but found a scene that made Clara's heart stop. There was a police car parked in front, and several people were gathered on the sidewalk. "What's going on?" Arthur asked the taxi driver. "I'm not sure, boss. Looks like there was some problem at the shelter." Clara jumped out of the taxi before it even stopped completely. She ran into the crowd, where she found one of the women who lived in the shelter. "What happened? Where is Mother Catherine?" The woman, her eyes red from crying, grabbed Clara's arm. "They took her, and Teresa too." "Who took it?" "Police. They said they were involved in something illegal, but Mother Catherine would never do anything wrong." Clara felt the world spin. "When did this happen?" "An hour ago, right after those men in suits came in and talked to the police officers." Arthur walked over, listening to the conversation. "Clara, we have to go." "I can't leave Teresa. She's in danger because of us. And so will we if we stay here." Clara knew he was right, but guilt gnawed at her. Teresa had agreed to help, and now she was paying the price. "Let's go," she said finally. "But let's save Teresa and Mother Catherine." They took another taxi and headed to a small apartment that Clara kept in the city center, one of her many hiding places. It was a simple but secure place where she kept important documents. "Is the evidence here?" Arthur asked. "Some, but the main ones are elsewhere." Clara opened a safe hidden behind a bookshelf and took out an envelope. Inside were flash drives, photographs and documents she had collected over the years. "Is that all?" "No, there's more." Clara hesitated. "Arthur, I need to tell you something." "What?" "When I escaped from the mansion, I didn't just take evidence with me. I took a person." Arthur frowned. "What do you mean?" "A girl. She was only 15. She had arrived at the house the week before. I couldn't leave her there." "Where is she now?" "Safe, with a family that adopted her informally. But she saw everything I saw. In fact, she saw more. She was in other homes in the network before arriving in Alphaville." Clara picked up a prepaid phone and dialed a number. "Maria? It's me, Clara. I need to speak to Anna." A few minutes later, a young voice answered. "Clara, good to hear from you." "Anna, dear, I need your help. Do you remember the things you saw in the houses? The people you met?" "I remember everything. I've never been able to forget." I'm building a case against them, against the senator and everyone else. Would you be willing to testify?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Can they find me?" "Not if we do this right. I'll get you out of the country before anything gets published. What about the other girls? The ones who are still trapped?" Clara closed her eyes. "Let's save them. All of them." "Then yes, I will testify." Clara gave Anna specific instructions on where to meet, then hung up. "We have our second witness. Clara, this is getting too dangerous. They've already arrested Teresa and Mother Catherine if they find out about Anna. That's why we have to act fast." Clara opened her laptop and began working. "I'll send everything we have to the international contacts now, simultaneously." The next few hours were a blur of frenetic activity. Clara and Arthur sent evidence to investigative journalists in 3 different countries, to Interpol, to human rights organizations, and to the FBI. Not only the material they had collected, but also Teresa's recorded statements and new recordings of the meeting with the senator. As they worked, news began to arrive. Mother Catherine had been released. Apparently, international pressure had worked faster than they had expected, but Teresa was still missing. She had started her journey as a victim. She had become a survivor. And now, finally, she was simply a woman in love, ready to build the future she had always deserved. On the other side of the country, in São Paulo, Teresa was starting a new life as well. With the help of an international organization, she had obtained citizenship in another country and was studying to become a lawyer. Her first words to Clara in their last conversation had been, "I will help other girls like us." Anna continued to grow strong and healthy with her adoptive family, and she had decided that when she got older, she wanted to work with organizations that helped survivors of human trafficking. And Mother Catherine had received funding to expand her shelter, turning it into a national network of safe houses. The fight was not over. There were still monsters in the world. There were still girls who needed saving. But now, there was also hope. There were people willing to fight. There were survivors who had become warriors. And sometimes, just sometimes, love really did conquer all. The next morning, Clara woke up in Arthur's arms, and for the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel afraid when she opened her eyes. She didn't check the exits, she didn't plan escape routes, she didn't wonder if that day would be her last. Instead, he simply smiled and whispered, "Good morning, love." And when Arthur kissed her back, she knew she had finally come home.